The things people throw away often turn out to be the things worth the most. The rain had already soaked through Naomi Brooks' coat by the time the front door clicked shut behind her. She stood on the walkway of the suburban house she had called home for 11 years, staring at 2 suitcases resting beside her feet. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, life continued. Outside, she was no longer part of it. Ethan Walker folded his arms across his chest and looked at her with the cold confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "You'll be fine," he said. "You always figure something out." Naomi didn't answer. The wind pushed damp strands of hair across her face as distant thunder rolled above the neighborhood. She knew there was no point arguing. So many endings happened long before the final conversation. Ethan turned and disappeared back inside. A second later, laughter drifted through the glass. Naomi lowered her eyes and reached for the only thing she truly cared about. Not the suitcases. Not the clothes. Not the framed photos she had left behind. A small wooden box rested carefully in her hands. The corners were worn smooth with age. The brass latch had faded decades ago. She held it tighter than everything else. Because it had belonged to her grandmother. 20 minutes later, Naomi sat alone in her aging sedan beneath the flickering lights of a gas station nearly 30 miles away. Rain tapped against the windshield in a steady rhythm. The dashboard clock read 11:47 de la noche. For the first time all night, she opened the wooden box. Inside lay a single silver card. Nothing flashy. Nothing impressive. No visible bank logo. No account number. Used polished metal, scratched by time, and a short engraved sentence on the back. Naomi ran her thumb across the words she had memorized years ago. Only when everything is lost. Her grandmother, Evelyn Brooks, had given it to her shortly before she passed away. Naomi still remembered the strange seriousness in her eyes that afternoon. The way she had squeezed her hand and told her to keep the card safe. Not valuable. Not important. Safe. At the time, Naomi thought it was simply a sentimental keepsake. A family memory. Yet now, sitting alone beneath the cold glow of gas station lights with nowhere certain to go tomorrow, the card felt different. Heavier somehow. More significant. She stared at it for several seconds as rain drummed against the roof. Then a memory surfaced. A memory she had never fully understood. The day of her grandmother's funeral. The black cars. The unfamiliar executives. And one distinguished older man who had quietly bowed his head beside the casket before leaving without introducing himself. Naomi slowly closed the box and looked into the darkness beyond the windshield. Somewhere deep inside, a question she had ignored for years finally demanded an answer. Who exactly had her grandmother been? So many memories do not become clearer with time. They become stranger. Naomi spent the rest of that night in a small roadside motel just off Interstate 95. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee. A neon sign outside the window blinked red and blue across the ceiling every few seconds. Sleep never came. She sat at the edge of the bed with the wooden box resting on her lap, listening to the distant sound of trucks rolling down the highway. The silver card lay in her hand. Cold. Smooth. Silent. For years it had been nothing more than a family keepsake. Yet the more she stared at it, the more questions surfaced. Questions she had never bothered to ask while life was comfortable. Questions that suddenly mattered now that everything familiar had disappeared. Her grandmother had never been a woman who spoke dramatically. Evelyn Brooks had lived in a modest brick house outside Savannah, Georgia. She grew roses in the backyard. Volunteered at church every Sunday. Drove the same sedan for nearly 15 years. Nothing about her suggested wealth, influence, or mystery. Yet certain details no longer fit the picture Naomi remembered. Details she had ignored because they seemed unimportant at the time. Around 3 in the morning, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Birthday parties. Family cookouts. Christmas mornings. Then she stopped at a picture taken nearly 8 years earlier. It was from Evelyn's 85th birthday. Naomi zoomed in the background stood three men wearing expensive suits. She did not recognize any of them. What struck her was not their appearance. It was their attention. They were all focused on Evelyn. Listening to her. Respecting her. Almost as if she were the most important person in the room. Naomi frowned. She remembered another moment too. Years ago, while helping clean her grandmother's attic, she had discovered a stack of letters tied together with a blue ribbon. Before she could open them, Evelyn gently took them away and smiled. Some stories are not meant to be read until the right day arrives. At the time, Naomi laughed. Now those words echoed differently. The right day arrives. Outside, the dawn slowly began to lighten the sky. Soft gray light filtered through the curtains. Naomi stood and walked toward the window. Across the parking lot, people were already starting their day. A delivery driver unloaded boxes. A woman carried coffee back to her room. Life moved forward whether people were ready or not. Naomi looked down at the silver card again. There was still no logo. No visible account information. No indication of what institution had issued it. Only the engraved sentence on the back. Only when everything is lost. She whispered the words aloud. Then another memory surfaced. When she had nearly forgotten. A week before her grandmother passed away, Evelyn had held Naomi's hand and asked a strange question. Do you trust yourself? Naomi remembered laughing softly and saying yes. Evelyn had nodded. Good. Because one day everyone else might tell you who you are. When that happens, do not believe them. Naomi stared at the card for a long moment. Ethan had spent years convincing her she was ordinary. Replaceable. Someone who needed him more than he needed her. Last night had been the final proof. Yet for the first time since leaving that house, uncertainty was giving way to curiosity. By 7 o'clock that morning, Naomi had made a decision. She placed the silver card back into the wooden box, gathered her belongings, and checked out of the motel. She did not know what the card meant. She did not know why her grandmother protected it so carefully. But she knew one thing. Before she decided what came next in her life, she was going to find out exactly why Evelyn Brooks wanted her to keep it safe. By mid-morning, Naomi found herself driving without a destination. The interstate stretched ahead beneath a pale blue sky while country music drifted softly from the radio. For years her life had followed a schedule built around someone else's priorities. Now every mile felt unfamiliar. The wooden box rested on the passenger seat beside her. Every time she glanced at it, she felt the same quiet pull. Around noon, she stopped at a small diner outside Richmond. The place smelled of fresh biscuits and coffee. Elderly couples chatted over breakfast plates while waitresses moved between booths carrying steaming mugs. It was the kind of place Evelyn would have loved. Naomi ordered a simple meal and sat near the window. As she stirred cream into her coffee, she opened the wooden box again. The silver card caught a beam of sunlight and reflected it across the table. An older waitress passing by paused for a second. That is a beautiful card, she said with a smile. Naomi smiled politely. I wish I knew what it was. The waitress laughed. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones people do not understand. The comment lingered after she walked away. An hour later, Naomi left the diner and sat in her car, staring at the card once more. She realized she had reached a crossroads. She could keep wondering about it for years. Or she could finally seek answers. Pulling out her phone, she began searching through old family records stored in cloud folders. Birth certificates. Photographs. Scanned letters. Most revealed nothing unusual. Then she found a document she had never noticed before. It was a faded newspaper clipping from nearly 40 years earlier. The article itself was difficult to read, but one line stood out clearly. It mentioned a charitable foundation receiving support from several anonymous donors, including someone identified only as E. Brooks. Naomi leaned closer to the screen. That alone was not surprising. Evelyn had always been generous. What caught her attention was the photograph attached to the article. Standing beside local officials was the same distinguished older man Naomi remembered from the funeral. Even decades younger, there was no mistaking him. The posture. The silver hair. The unmistakable confidence. Naomi enlarged the image. Underneath was a caption. Richard Sterling, President of Sterling National Bank. Her heart skipped. Sterling National was one of the largest financial institutions in the country. Why would the president of a major bank attend a local charity event with her grandmother? More importantly, why would he later attend her funeral? Naomi sat back in silence. Another memory surfaced. She had been 17. One afternoon she came home from school and found Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table speaking with a man in a dark suit. The conversation stopped when Naomi entered. The man immediately stood and greeted her with unusual warmth. At the time she assumed he was a lawyer. Now she wondered if he had been connected to the bank. The pieces refused to fit together. Yet they were slowly forming a picture she had never seen before. As afternoon sunlight filled the car, Naomi looked down at the silver card resting in her palm. She suddenly realized something that sent a chill through her. In all the years she had known her grandmother, Evelyn had never once explained where the card came from. Not once. Almost as if the explanation itself had been waiting for a specific moment. A specific day. A day when Naomi had lost everything else. She took a slow breath, started the engine, and entered Sterling National Bank into her navigation app. The nearest branch was 22 miles away. Whatever answers existed, they were no longer hiding in the past. They were waiting for her there. The branch looked ordinary from the outside. Glass doors. Polished stone walls. A row of American flags moving gently in the afternoon breeze. If Naomi had driven past it 100 times, she would never have given it a second glance. Yet as she stepped out of her car and looked at the Sterling National Bank sign above the entrance, she felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. Part of her wondered if she was chasing nothing more than an old family mystery. Another part could not ignore the feeling that her grandmother had been guiding her toward this moment for years. The wooden box felt heavier under her arm as she walked inside. Cooler greeted her immediately. The lobby was bright and quiet. Sunlight streamed through tall windows and reflected off marble floors. Customers stood in line. Employees worked behind polished counters. Everything appeared calm, predictable, ordinary. Naomi approached an available teller, a young woman with a friendly smile and a neatly pressed navy uniform. "Good afternoon," the teller said. "How may I help you today?" Naomi hesitated. She had rehearsed this moment during the drive but still felt slightly foolish. "I am not exactly sure," she admitted. "My grandmother left me something years ago. I think it might be connected to this bank." The teller offered a polite smile. "I can certainly take a look." Naomi carefully opened the wooden box and removed the silver card. She placed it on the counter. For a moment, nothing happened. The teller reached for it casually. Then her expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for Naomi to notice. Her smile disappeared. The woman looked down again. Then closer. Her fingers froze around the card. Naomi watched confusion flicker across her face. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The teller swallowed. "One moment, please." She turned toward her computer and typed something. Seconds passed. Then more. Naomi noticed the color slowly draining from the teller's face. The woman's eyes widened slightly. She stopped typing. Looked at the screen. Looked back at the card. Then at Naomi. The atmosphere shifted. It happened so subtly that most people in the lobby never noticed. But Naomi did. The teller picked up a phone beneath the counter and spoke quietly into it. Within less than a minute, a man in a gray suit emerged from a nearby office. His name tag identified him as Assistant Branch Manager. A approached quickly. The teller handed him the card without explanation. The manager glanced down. His posture instantly straightened. A looked at Naomi with a level of attention she had not received since entering the building. "Ma'am, sit carefully, would you mind waiting just a moment?" Before Naomi could answer, he was already walking away with the card. Through the glass walls of several offices, she could see movement. Employees speaking urgently. Managers leaving desks. Phone receivers being lifted. A woman in a business suit hurried down a hallway while looking at a tablet. Naomi sat quietly in a chair near the counter. 5 minutes earlier she had been another customer. Now something strange was unfolding around her. Across the lobby, a security officer received a message through an earpiece and immediately moved toward a restricted doorway. Another employee closed the conference room and pulled down privacy blinds. Naomi's pulse quickened. Nobody had explained anything. Nobody had answered a single question. Yet one thing had become impossible to ignore. The silver card was not ordinary. And whatever information had appeared on that computer screen had made an entire bank react as if someone important had just walked through the front door. The longer Naomi waited, the stranger the silence became. Nobody treated her like an ordinary customer anymore, yet nobody explained why. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Through the glass walls surrounding the offices, she could see activity spreading through the building like a ripple across water. Employees who had looked relaxed moments earlier now moved with unusual purpose. Several conversations stopped the instant she glanced in their direction. Phones continued ringing. Doors opened and closed. Computer screens were turned away from public view. Naomi sat quietly with her hands folded over the wooden box. Years of disappointment had taught her patience. If answers were coming, forcing them would not make them arrive faster. A woman in a tailored navy suit eventually approached her. Her silver name badge identified her as the branch manager. Unlike the teller, she did not seem surprised. She seemed cautious. Respectful. Almost nervous. "Miss Brooks," she said gently. Naomi blinked. "I do not remember giving anyone my name." The manager paused for a second before offering a professional smile. "We were able to verify your identity." That answer only created more questions. The manager gestured toward a private office. "Would you be more comfortable waiting in one of our executive conference rooms?" Naomi looked around the lobby. Several employees appeared to be watching discreetly. "Why would I need an executive conference room?" she asked. The manager hesitated. "I am afraid I cannot answer that yet." "Yet." "Not no. Yet." Naomi noticed the choice of words immediately. She stood and followed the manager through a secured hallway. The deeper they moved into the building, the more unusual everything became. Employees stepped aside when they passed. One senior manager actually rose from his chair as Naomi walked by. Another gave a respectful nod. Nobody explained anything. The conference room itself overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. A polished table occupied the center. Bottled water had already been placed beside a leather chair. As if someone had prepared for an important guest. Naomi sat down slowly. "My grandmother left me that card," she said. "That is all I know." The manager's expression softened. Evelyn Brooks was a remarkable woman. Naomi felt her heart skip. It was the first direct acknowledgement of her grandmother all day. "You knew her?" The manager immediately looked uncomfortable. "Not personally." Before Naomi could continue, a notification sounded from the manager's phone. She checked the screen and her eyes widened. "Excuse me," she said quickly. "I need to take this." She stepped into the hallway and closed the door. Through the glass, Naomi could see 3 executives gathering around her. Whatever message had arrived seemed important. Very important. Minutes later the door opened again. The manager returned, but now her composure looked strained. Miss Brooks, she said carefully, there has been a development. Naomi waited. Our regional executives have been notified. Naomi frowned it. Over a card? The manager swallowed. It is no longer being handled at the regional level. A strange chill moved through the room. Then who is handling it? The manager lowered her voice. Corporate headquarters. Naomi stared at her. Sterling National operated. Thousands of branches across the country. Corporate headquarters did not involve itself in routine matters. Yet somehow a scratched silver card hidden in a wooden box for decades had captured the attention of the highest levels of one of America's largest banks. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, people she had never met were now discussing her name. Naomi had expected a manager. Perhaps a senior executive. Maybe even a corporate attorney. What she did not expect was the reaction that followed over the next 20 minutes. The conference room door remained closed while activity outside intensified. Through the glass walls, she could see employees moving faster than before. Several executives had arrived from other offices. One man in a dark suit entered carrying a secure document case. Another appeared to be speaking with someone on a video call displayed across a tablet screen. Nobody ignored her presence. Yet nobody approached her either. It felt as if the entire building was waiting for permission from someone else. Finally, the branch manager returned. This time she was accompanied by two additional executives Naomi had not seen before. Both wore expressions usually reserved for board meetings and major corporate announcements. The manager took a careful breath. Miss Brooks, headquarters has requested that the card remain in our possession temporarily for verification. Naomi glanced toward the silver card resting inside a protective case on the table. Verification of what? She asked. Nobody answered immediately. One executive exchanged a look with the other. It was enough to tell her they knew more than they were willing to say. We are still gathering information, the manager replied diplomatically. Naomi leaned back in her chair. You keep saying that. Yet everyone in this building looks like something extraordinary just happened. The room fell silent. For a brief moment, nobody knew how to respond. Then one of the executives spoke. Miss Brooks, in my 23 years with Sterling National, I have never personally seen one of these cards. Naomi stared at him. One of these cards. The executive seemed to realize he had said too much. Quickly looked away. Yet the statement lingered in the room long after he stopped speaking. One of these cards. Not an account card. Not a bank card. Something far rare. Before Naomi could ask another question, the conference room phone rang. Every person at the table immediately turned toward it. The manager answered. Her posture changed almost instantly. Yes, sir, she said. Of course, sir. Naomi watched the color leave the manager's face. Right away. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. When it ended, the room became completely still. The manager slowly lowered the receiver and looked directly at Naomi. Miss Brooks, she said quietly, there has been another update. Naomi folded her hands calmly. At this point, almost nothing would have surprised her. What now? The manager swallowed. The chairman's office has been notified. The words landed heavily. Even Naomi understood what that meant. The chairman's office sat at the very top of the organization. Entire divisions reported upward through layers of leadership before reaching that level. Ordinary customer matters never traveled there. The executive beside her shifted in his seat. Actually, he said carefully, it goes beyond that. Naomi waited. The man cleared his throat. The chairman personally requested immediate access to all historical records connected to the Brooks family. For the first time all afternoon, Naomi felt genuinely stunned. Historical records. Not account records. Family records. Somewhere deep within Sterling National's archives, information about Evelyn Brooks apparently existed. Information important enough to awaken the attention of the bank's highest authority. Then the conference room phone rang again. This time nobody moved immediately. Everyone seemed to understand the significance of the call before it was even answered. The manager finally picked up. She listened for several seconds. Her eyes widened. When she hung up, she looked directly at Naomi. "Miss Brooks," she said softly, "Richard Sterling would like to speak with you personally." The room fell silent. Even the executives appeared stunned. Richard Sterling was not merely the chairman. He was the legendary chief executive whose name appeared on the bank itself. And somehow, on one of the worst days of Naomi's life, the man responsible for one of the largest financial institutions in America was asking to speak directly to her. The conference room suddenly felt smaller. Not because anything had changed inside it, but because Naomi realized the world outside that room was far larger than she had imagined. Richard Sterling. The name alone carried weight. Newspapers wrote about him. Financial channels analyzed his decisions. Entire markets reacted when he spoke. Yet now he wanted to speak directly with her. The branch manager placed a secure conference phone in the center of the table. Every executive present instinctively straightened their posture. One even adjusted his tie. Nobody said a word. A soft light blinked on the phone. Then the call connected. "Miss Brooks." The voice was older, calm, and unmistakably confident. Naomi took a breath. "Yes." There was a brief pause. Then came words she never expected to hear. "I have been hoping this call would happen for many years." Naomi looked around the room. Every executive seemed frozen. "I am sorry," she said carefully. "I think you may know more about me than I know about myself." To her surprise, Richard Sterling chuckled softly. "That is not your fault." Another pause followed. "How are you today, Miss Brooks?" The question sounded ordinary, yet something about it felt sincere. Naomi considered the truth. 24 hours earlier she had lost her marriage, her home, and the future she thought she understood. "I have had better days," she admitted. Silence lingered on the line. Then Richard spoke again. "Your grandmother would not have wanted you to face this day alone." The mention of Evelyn immediately caught her attention. "You knew her?" This time there was no hesitation. "Yes. He knew her very well." Naomi felt her pulse quicken. For days she had been collecting fragments of a mystery. Now, finally, someone seemed willing to acknowledge it openly. "Who was she?" she asked. The room became so quiet that even the air conditioning seemed loud. Richard Sterling answered slowly, choosing each word with care. "Evelyn Brooks was one of the most extraordinary people I have ever known." Naomi waited. When Sterling National was still a small regional institution decades ago, there was a financial crisis that nearly destroyed everything. Investors left. Partners disappeared. Many believed the bank would not survive. It paused. Most people remember the executives who rebuilt it. Very few remember the woman who made rebuilding possible. Naomi felt her heart pounding. Richard continued. "Your grandmother was that woman." No one in the room moved. Naomi could hardly process what she was hearing. "That cannot be right," she whispered. "My grandmother lived in a small house. She worked as a school administrator." "Later in life, yes," Richard replied. "But people are often more than the chapters others see." Naomi glanced toward the silver card resting inside its protective case. Suddenly it looked less like an object and more like a key. "What exactly is that card?" she asked. For the first time since the conversation began, Richard Sterling became completely serious. "Miss Brooks, that card represents a founding privilege that has not been activated in over 30 years." Every executive in the room exchanged stunned looks. Richard continued. There are only 3 such cards in existence. 2 were surrendered long ago, the third belonged to Evelyn Brooks. Naomi stared at the table. Her grandmother had protected this secret her entire life. Then Richard said something that changed everything. And according to the original charter documents, upon Evelyn's passing, every right attached to that card became yours. For several seconds after the call ended, nobody in the conference room spoke. Naomi remained still, trying to absorb what Richard Sterling had just told her. A founding privilege. Charter rights. Family records hidden inside one of the largest banks in America. None of it sounded real. Yet the reactions around her made it impossible to dismiss. The executives looked stunned. The branch manager looked emotional. And the silver card sitting inside its protective case was suddenly being treated as if it belonged in a museum rather than a bank. One of the senior executives finally cleared his throat. Miss Brooks, he said respectfully, headquarters has authorized access to historical archives connected to your family. Some of those records have not been viewed in decades. Naomi slowly shook her head. My grandmother never talked about any of this. That was intentional, the executive replied. He opened a tablet and turned the screen toward her. A black and white photograph appeared. Naomi immediately recognized Evelyn. She looked much younger, standing beside a group of businessmen outside an old stone building. What shocked Naomi was not the photograph itself. It was where Evelyn was standing. She was not off to the side. She was not in the background. She stood in the center. Everyone else appeared positioned around her. That was taken 42 years ago, the executive explained. During a restructuring event that ultimately saved the institution. Naomi stared at the image. The woman in the photograph looked confident. Powerful. Completely different from the grandmother who spent afternoons gardening and baking peach pie. Yet somehow it was undeniably the same person. More documents followed. Meeting records. Historical correspondence. Photographs. References to Evelyn Brooks appeared repeatedly. Not as a customer. Not as an employee. But as someone whose opinions had influenced major decisions. The deeper the records went, the more Naomi understood why Richard Sterling spoke about her grandmother with such respect. Then another document appeared. This one carried a familiar name. Sterling National Commercial Lending Division. Naomi glanced at it casually at first. Then her eyes narrowed. Something about the company listed on the page caught her attention. Wellcare Development Group. Her stomach tightened. She leaned closer to the screen. The executive noticed immediately. Do you know that company? Naomi nodded slowly. My ex-husband owns it. The room grew quiet again. The executive exchanged a look with the branch manager before scrolling further. Additional records appeared. Financial summaries. Credit exposure reports. Active lending agreements. Naomi did not understand every detail, but one fact became very clear. Ethan's company relied heavily on financing from Sterling National. Much more heavily than she had ever realized. The executive carefully chose his next words. Walker Development currently maintains several major credit facilities with the bank. Naomi looked away from the screen and toward the city skyline beyond the conference room windows. Less than 2 days earlier, Ethan had looked at her as though she had nothing left to offer the world. Now she was sitting inside a conference room where executives were discussing connections between her family and the institution helping support his business. The irony was almost unbelievable. Yet what surprised her most was her own reaction. She did not feel angry. She did not feel triumphant. Mostly, she felt sad. Sad that Ethan had spent years measuring people's value by what he could see. Because if he had understood Evelyn Brooks even a little, he might have understood Naomi too. A soft notification sounded from the executive's tablet. He glanced down and immediately straightened. Miss Brooks, he said quietly, Richard Sterling has just boarded a flight. Naomi frowned it. A flat. The executive nodded. He is coming here personally. The room fell silent once more. Not because of who Naomi was yesterday, but because of who everyone was beginning to realize she had been all along. Richard Sterling arrived just before sunset. News of his visit spread through the building long before he stepped through the doors. Senior executives lined the hallway. Department heads appeared from offices Naomi had not even known existed. Yet when the elevator finally opened, the man who emerged looked less like a corporate legend and more like someone carrying an old memory. His silver hair was neatly combed. His dark suit was simple. His expression softened the moment he saw Naomi. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Richard Sterling walked forward and extended both hands. You look so much like her, he said quietly. Naomi knew immediately who he meant. My grandmother? Richard nodded. There was genuine emotion in his eyes. The same strength. The same calm. He guided her into a private boardroom, overlooking the city. Historical documents had been arranged across the table. Photographs. Letters. Original charter records. Pieces of a story hidden for decades. For the next hour, Richard filled in the missing chapters. Evelyn Brooks had never sought attention. When the bank faced collapse decades earlier, she quietly provided the support that allowed it to survive. In return, the founders created a special charter privilege tied to her family line. Not because she demanded power. Because she had earned their trust. Your grandmother always believed character mattered more than wealth, Richard said. That is why she never used what she had to impress anyone. Naomi smiled softly. That sounded exactly like Evelyn. Then Richard handed her one final document. The charter transfer record. Her name appeared beneath her grandmother's. The rights now belonged to her. Naomi stared at the paper for a long moment before setting it down. I do not want revenge, she said quietly. Richard nodded as if he had expected that answer. Your grandmother would be proud to hear you say that. Outside the boardroom windows, the city lights slowly came alive as evening settled across the skyline. Naomi thought about the previous 48 hours. The house she lost. The marriage that ended. The uncertainty that had followed. Yet somehow, standing at what felt like the end of one life, she had discovered the beginning of another. Not because she became powerful. Because she finally understood her own worth. As she prepared to leave, every executive in the room stood. Not out of obligation. Out of respect. Richard Sterling personally returned the silver card to her hands. This belongs with you, he said. Naomi looked down at the worn metal surface. The scratches. The age. The simple sentence engraved on the back. Only when everything is lost. For the first time, she truly understood its meaning. Some inheritances are not measured in dollars. Some are measured in identity. She placed the card back inside the wooden box and walked toward the door. Behind her, the leaders of one of the largest financial institutions in America remained standing. Ahead of her was an uncertain future. Yet she felt lighter than she had in years. Ethan had believed he was watching someone leave with nothing. He never realized she had been carrying something priceless all along. And as Naomi stepped into the evening light, she did not feel like a woman who had lost her marriage. She felt like a woman who had finally found herself.